speak into it. Working?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me? What's happening?
Nothing.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, straight on. Straight on, okay. Well, try it again. Now can you hear me? Okay, good. Well, thanks for those nice words of introduction. Can everybody see back there? If you can move around up here if you have to, or wherever you have to see. It's not too bright, or we need to shut lights off? Are we okay? All right. Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me tonight. When I got thinking about this, of course, and there's the iconic Vimy Memorial that we're all familiar with now from last year, and of course this year too, with the end of the war, or the 100th anniversary of the end of the war. It's Armistice Remembrance Day has had kind of an up and down history. I think there was a real uptake over the last 2 years on this because of Vimy and the end of the war. Get rid of that frog. But it's had kind of a checkered history. It was very solemn, and in the 1920s, after the war, 1930s, it started to wane because there was a real anti-war movement, pacifist movement all across the world. The history of the war started to be written, much to the veterans' chagrin, as a waste of lives, that it was run by dumb officers and dumb politicians, and so on. And it seemed that their efforts were in vain. The veterans didn't see it that way, but it sort of lapsed. Then, of course, we had the Second War, and we had a whole batch of new veterans and new remembrances happening then afterwards. So the World War I veterans kind of got pushed to the side. In the 60s, we had a big anti-war movement. You remember the Vietnam protests. You know, if you're my age, certainly you remember all that went on in the 60s. And even for a time in the 70s and 80s, it almost looked like Remembrance Day was going to die out because crowds were small, only veterans were attending, and so on. Then in the 90s, we've had a bit of an upturn, and we've had quite a bit of better turnout. But my concern is what's going to happen now. If you're my age, you could have grandfathers who fought in the First World War. So we're not that far, my generation, not that far removed yet from people who were in the war. But what do we do 25, 50 years from now, when we're 4, 5, 6 generations removed from the people who were in that war? Are we going to remember them, and so on? And one of the things that sort of got me going in is a book here by a fellow named Alan McLeod. Alan McLeod, I think he's gone all across Canada. He's photographed, I think, every cenotaph, every war memorial in existence. This book, the little book that he published, I think you can only get it online. And this isn't even my own copy, it belongs to my good friend John Sargent. But he writes about how many of these cenotaphs now are falling into disrepair in communities. Part of that reason is because of the depopulation of the rural areas. When some of these monuments were put up in the 1920s, you had a community of maybe 11 or 1200 people that put up a monument. Now you go to that community, you're lucky if you have 100 people there. And the cenotaph is falling apart. Many of them which were made with Italian marble, which was the cheapest monument you could get. Well, I won't say the cheapest, the least expensive monument you could get. But
Microphone's out again.
oh, is it out again?
Use your teacher voice.
Okay. Well, Richard said it didn't work that well. Is it not working? Okay. Better yet, teacher's voice. Good. All right. So, where was I? I think on Alan McLeod's book, yes, about the Italian marble cenotaphs. On the scale of hardness, diamond is 10, marble is 4. It doesn't last through Canadian winter, especially on the prairies. They start to deteriorate. And even here, in Thorndale, Ontario, the cenotaph was falling apart. And John Sargent went to the city council, or the councillors out there, or the, I don't know, the mayor of the municipality, and said, your cenotaf's falling apart. And they said, well, yeah, but we don't have any money to fix it. And he said, well, you go to the federal government, Department of Affairs. We know this well, because John and I worked on the Curry project. We know we got money from Veterans Affairs for the Curry project. I'll get it right here. So, they said, oh, I didn't know that. So they got their cenotaph refurbished, thanks to John. So, you see, a good example, I was thinking even in our own area here. When we came to just north of Appin, where we still live, 35 years ago, in Appin we had a bank, post office, a couple of stores, gas station repair shop, farm equipment repair. What do we have there now? Zero. Houses, but zero. No, we don't have a cenotaph, but if we did, who would be looking after it? It'd have to be the municipality. Whether they would or not, we don't know. So it shows you the example of how some of these things might go. So let me get on to the next one. I'll just show you that everybody's familiar with WWII. There's the Benham Gate, and I'm showing you now, and that's in the town of Ypres, or Wipers, or whatever you want to call it. It's in Belgium, and there are many Canadian names on there, along with Australians, South Africans. It's the British Empire monument. And right in there, 8 o'clock every night, they stop the traffic right here, both ways, and they come out and play the last post. And if you're you makes the hair on my arm stand on it just thinking about it. When you go there, it is one of the most moving ceremonies that you can imagine takes place, because the sound is just echoing in that Benham Gate. And you're looking at, well, there's 56,000 names of soldiers who have no known grave on that monument. Back on the WWII one, I think there's 11 or 12,000. Those are all Canadian names. These are from all across the world, but they have no known names. So let's get on with the fellows here. And the first guy that I want to talk about is a fellow called Roy. I better get his name right, so that I have it exactly right. Charles McGregor Blott, the unusual name, B-L-O-T-T, who was from Wardsville. Doesn't seem to be any relatives in Wardsville or area now. He had a sister out in Winnipeg, and he had a brother who was a doctor in Hamilton at one time. These are his medals. That's his picture. Why he's kind of interesting. He was one of the early enlistees. September of 1914. The war started August the 4th. He enlisted in September and was sent overseas with the first contingent. Ended up at the Second Battle of Ypres, which was the notorious gas attack launched by the Germans, and he was killed in that. I don't know whether it was exactly that first day, but he was killed in that battle in 1915. Early enlistee, early casualty. These are the medals the 1915 medals that his family was given, and his cross as well. And this little medal, which was given by the town of or the village of Albrechtas. There's the front of it, and there's the back of it. I don't know whether you can read that or not, but anyway, by the citizens of, not Albrechtas. What was I talking about? Wardsville is what I'm trying to say. Wardsville. Getting confused here. But anyway, he was from Wardsville. They have no relatives living, as I say, around the area. But that was presented to every person from Wardsville, either those who came back or to the families of those who didn't. So that's Blott's medals. This was acquired by a fellow who sent me the information, and that was Blott's medals. Now, this one you're probably familiar with, Alvin Valentine. And I won't go into a lot of Jim May, him and Jane May, but Jim May can tell you all about him. He had quite an interesting history. He was born in India and went through several sets of step parents, 2 sets of step parents, before he ended up out here in Eckford Township at Carruthers Corners, working for the Carruthers family. And what had happened at one point in time, that was the article on the paper. They remembered Elwyn Valentine at Carruthers Corners because, as I mentioned, there was it's a sycamore tree, or a buttonwood as they called it, that was apparently Elwyn and Mr. Carruthers were clearing the brush, and this was the only tree of its kind in the bush. It was not a big tree, I guess, at the time, but they decided to leave it, and it's still there. So if you go out to the corner of MacArthur and Old Drive, southeast corner, you'll come across this sign on the tree. And so you can go visit that if you want. He was killed, as you can see, in 1917. There was a picture of him that stayed in the Carruthers house there for decades in his uniform. Jim May has it now, but that was the picture of Elwyn Valentine. But it was kept in the house even long after he had passed away. So there's something you can see, something that you can locally visit. And that's where actually Elwyn is buried now, in that cemetery in France. That's where he is now. But the monument or the little sign is on the cottonwood, or that, not cottonwood, but the buttonwood tree. And that's where he is. So, oh yes, this is hard to see because, thanks Joanne Galbraith for this photo. It's about Herman Furby, who was from, but he was working in Windsor. He listed on his attestation papers, he listed as a druggist, but I know you can't see very well, but if you saw that picture close up, if you think that kid is 18 years old, boy, look at and I'll tell you how I found him. I couldn't tell which was which because it just said Herman and Harvey Furby on the back of the picture. So I looked up his attestation papers, and it said Herman had a scar on the chin. Getting out my magnifying glass, there's the guy, the scar on the chin. But look at the coat. I said, what are you hanging on? Now he was only about, according to his papers, I think it said he was 5'3", and not very heavy. But and that, I'm not sure where that picture was taken. I guess his brother survived. I didn't find any record of his brother being killed, but he didn't. He didn't survive. And let me just get going here. Now, you can't really see it, unfortunately now. His name is on the Menon gate, and he's right down here. Herman Furby. I didn't take this picture. Somebody took it and sent it to me, and they obviously weren't looking at the shadows very well, but his name is right there on the Menon gate. And so another local fellow in the enlistee who didn't make it. And now here's an interesting fellow. Sergeant Gilbert Fletcher won the military medal, which is basically the highest decoration that a non-officer can get, aside from the Victoria Cross. Every soldier is entitled to win the Victoria Cross, but anything above the military medal is just reserved for officers, like a DSO, which is a Distinguished Service Order. Usually it was given to officers, even if they didn't do much, they got one anyway. But these guys that were doing the work in the trenches, why he's kind of an interesting character. He enlisted, he's age 35 when he enlists. He's married, he was living in London on Princess Ave. Why he enlisted at age 35, I have no idea. I didn't know whether he had any children or not. Maybe he didn't like his wife, I don't know. He enlisted and served for 3 years. He was killed, I think, in 1918. So he almost made the end of the war, but he was killed before that happened. Oh, he was from Newbury. That was the other thing. He's a Newbury lad. And but he was living in London at the time. I think he worked for the railroad too, so. Go on to the next one. Okay. And that's Roy Graham from Melbourne. Now, he does have some relatives, according to Joanne. Tells me that he does have some relatives still living in the area. That's his soldier's picture with his with his bayonet and so on. He's a conscript. He's not a volunteer. He gets in he's sent to France under the Conscription Act, the notorious Conscription Act of 1917. And he wasn't in France long. He was sent over in spring of 1918 and died, also was killed in 1918. I have all the details, but I won't go into all of those. And there is some, again, thanks to Joanne, these. There's, I think the letter, let's see if I can read that better here. Oh, that's a letter from Roy to his brother, at least part of the letter to his brother, describing the conditions in France. And this is a letter from the Italian padre to his relatives, explaining or talking about his death and how he was killed and so on. So, an interesting thing because, we hear a lot about the conscription crisis, and I think they sent about 20,000 conscriptees over to Europe. How many of them got to France, I don't know. He was one of them. I'm not sure. He was one of them, and unfortunately, didn't survive. And that's where he's buried now in Princeton. So he does have a burial place. He's not on the Vimy Monument or the Bannon Gate or anything else, but he's there. Now, another fellow is Errol Rainey, whose relatives lived down the road from me. And he enlisted. He was killed again in 1918. Another enlistee. Let's find some more info. Anyway, he was killed. There's a picture of him, and we found a few years ago, Vicki and I and her sister and her aunt, we went on a battlefield tour, and we found the cemetery that he was buried in. It was a real. We drove around, finally found a little sign that says, Commonwealth War Graves, and we go up the road. It's paved, then it becomes gravel, then it becomes a two-lane, farm lane, and right at the top of the hill is this little cemetery. It's not a big cemetery, but that's where he's buried. And you can see it's not overly large. If you look at it, it's pretty small. I forget how many exactly there, but not many. But we did find his thing, and you probably can't read it all that well, but we put a Canadian flag by his tombstone there. He's left behind, his family has left behind quite a bit of information, and that's all the stuff that belongs to Errol. It's in the Strathroy Caradoc Museum. I'm sure if you go and ask them for it, they'll let you look at it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's the death penny. I think that's what it is. But there's some other documents, and his watch, and some medals that he would be either given to him or the family. And this is his diary, which Mickey and I found a little disappointing when we looked at it, because he was not a prolific writer. You might say September the 2nd, rain today. That was the entry. Didn't tell us what happened, whether he was in battle or anything. So, and most of it's like that up to that time. It's just a very short little. I guess he just wanted to remember what happened on September the 2nd of the rain. Now, here's the one that's really interesting, because this is Arnold Logan, who came from the Munsee, Delaware Reserve just down the road. Although, he did give, on the attestation papers, this is where it gets interesting, he did give his birthplace as Middlemiss.
That's because Middlemiss was the birthplace of Arnold.
Well,
We live in Middlemiss, but the reserve is right across.
right across the road.
And Glasgow was born right across the road. They gave Middlemiss when they had to fill in the papers.
Yeah, that's what he did. But he is not on the Eckford not war board, but the Roll of Honor. His name is not on there. It should be, because if it says he was born in Middlemiss, it means he was born in Eckford Township, even if he really wasn't. There was another fellow, his name was escapes, who also came from, who survived the war, but he died, who's also buried out in the cemetery near Arnold. Arnold's monument, as I'll get to in a minute. Who did list his as Munsee, who did list his birthplace as Munsee on his attestation papers. But Arnold put down Middlemiss. There's his gravestone, and some years later there was a monument set up in the cemetery for Arnold. I'll get to that in a minute. And these are some newspaper clippings. The other thing I found out about Arnold is he was in St. Thomas. He was one of the first 100 to enlist from St. Thomas. I didn't mention that. He was living and working in St. Thomas at the time. He worked on the fire department, as a fireman on the railroads. And he was living in St. Thomas. So he enlisted in St. Thomas with the St. Thomas Regiment, or the Elgin Regiment it was at that time. And so these are some newspaper articles. They sent letters home. He and another fellow, they sent letters home. There's this article was totally erroneous. They were not captured by the Germans. Probably would have been better if they had. And then he was wounded. An article that talks about him being wounded. And then, Private Biggs was his buddy. And there's the article talking about how he was killed. He is considered to be the first indigenous person killed in World War I, at least on the Canadian side. There's some dispute from the group in Manitoulin Island that say their guy was killed first. Why you would argue over something like that, I have no idea. But anyway, it's considered that Arnold was the first one killed in 1916. And he wasn't all that old, he was only 20 when he was killed. So I found out that there was a monument erected to Arnold in the cemetery on the reserve at the family plot. And as you can probably guess, it's falling into some kind of disrepair. Talked to the band chief about that. Well, they didn't seem all that interested. I think, and I may stand to be corrected on this, maybe it seems to be the Aboriginal tradition that they don't look after cemeteries like we do. They don't groom nor cut the grass. They have a cemetery, you're buried in the cemetery, you let the weeds grow, you let the trees grow, you let it go back to nature. So, even as family plot, we probably wouldn't have found it if we hadn't seen the monument. Nikki and I went out to look at it this fall, to get pictures of it. And this monument was erected by the union that he belonged to in St. Thomas, the firemen and engineers, the brotherhood of locomotive firemen and engineers set up this monument I think in the 20s or the 30s, but anyway. But it is kind of falling apart. Is there any way of fixing that up, or do we just let it fall apart? I don't know. I have to work with band council, people in St. Thomas. There's an Elgin Regiment Association. I don't know what we should do about that. It's still up in the air. I hate to see the monument just sort of fall apart. You can see the pictures there. It's hard to tell, but you can see it's not in good shape. And there's his 20th year, so he wasn't even 20 when he was killed. But Arnold Logan, son of had born in 1898, so or 96. Okay. Anyway, we did have the one that was done by the Brotherhood of the Firemen Engineers. So the monument's deteriorating. What's to be done? I don't know. If we can get it refurbished, does the family want it to be refurbished? Maybe they're just willing to let it go, like many of the other monuments in the cemetery. You know, headstones and whatnot. Maybe that's traditional. It's fine with me if that's what they want to do. You have to get everybody involved. Oh yeah, that's the one. I didn't see there. Can you make it up there? Brother B of L, F, and E. So Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen and Engineers. They're the ones that set up the monument. They collected the money and donated it. Which shows you, I guess, how well liked he was by his fellow workers. And Arnold still does have some relatives in this area, and still in southern Ontario. And Norma Richter from Melbourne is related to, in some way, to Arnold. So maybe something can be done to remember him more. Maybe just one last one I'll close with. How far do you suppose you have to travel to find this memorial or this headstone? Got to get on the jetliner to go to France? Jump in your car and go down Glendon Drive to the Glencoe Cemetery, or the Glencoe Cemetery, there on Highway 2, and you'll find Norman Murray's headstone in there. He was training in the RAF to be a mechanic. I believe it was in Hamilton or Ancaster. He hadn't left Canada. That's why he's buried here in Canada. But he's under the Commonwealth War Graves Commission because they provided the headstone and everything. He died in 1918 while the war was still on, so he's considered a war casualty. Okay? Kind of an interesting little... He was also a conscript. He was not volunteer, not conscripted. He had originally come from this area, but his family had moved, I think, out west. But why he was buried in Glencoe, I don't know. According to his military records, he died from pneumonia. But I'm guessing, and only guessing, 1918, Spanish flu, because it started already in 1918. 1919 was probably the worst year for it, but it extended into the 20s as well. Two of the most famous casualties that I can think of the Spanish flu right off were the Dodge brothers, automakers in the United States. Both those young men died from the Spanish flu, and their company was eventually, their widows sold the company to a fellow named Walter P. Chrysler. So that's where the name Chrysler comes from. And the Dodge, he maintained the Dodge name. So that's, one more. Okay, we're back to the map. I just want to finish off because hopefully I've given you a little bit of information about these fellows from our area. Are we going to forget them? I don't know. I hope not. I hope that the only thing we got